Hello and welcome to another episode of the New Frontier AI for E-commerce podcast. Joe, how are you?
Woo! All right. What is it? It's Wednesday. It's a miserable day in Germany, but I'm feeling quite pumped. How about you, Max? How are you doing?
Well, I'm feeling good, and I'm super excited about our guest today. So we have Gary Huang. I think I first got in touch with Gary because he ran like a 28 days AI action for 28 days, and I was kind of involved in this, and this was a year ago. So this was kind of one of the first kind of people, like, you know, who's a seller himself, but more importantly, kind of an organizer. He runs the 7-figure seller summit. He he's been in the White House to talk about trade. He's a sourcing expert. So there's a lot of stuff that he knows, but that's how we first got in contact. And that was about a year ago. So not only is he kind of doing all of that stuff, but very excited to hear that he was getting into AI. So that's how we became acquainted. And yeah, it's great to have him on. So I think maybe we'll bring him out. Gary, how are you?
Doing well. Hey Max.
Gary.
Hey Joe. Greetings from Tokyo.
What time is it over in Tokyo?
It's Wednesday night, 8:30-ish.
Yeah.
Right. So we are basically disturbing your usual evening time, like, you know, just chilling. And now you have to do a podcast with us. My God. Thank you very much, Gary.
I wish that were the case. I wish that were true, Joe. Usually this is like my night shift, and I have another meeting after this. But yeah, I'm just very excited to be on New Frontier podcast to speak with you guys.
So Gary, I'll go back over the intro, but please fill in what I missed, because there's a lot of stuff going on here. So you are the founder of 80/20 Sourcing and the 7-figure seller summit, which I was on, and it was fantastic. One of the best ones I've been on. You help thousands of e-commerce entrepreneurs save time and money sourcing products from China to scale their businesses. Which something else we'll get into in a second. You're the chair of the American Chamber of Commerce and Shanghai Supply Chain Committee, and you went to the Trump White House. Many of us think, well, many people, including me, think Trump is going to be coming back in. So it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on that and sourcing. And you're a seller. So did I miss anything in there, Gary?
No, I think you about covered it. I'm the former chair of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, back when I was still living there. I lived there for over a decade, for 11 years, from 2008 until 2019. So I was the chair for several years during that period. I'm currently based in Japan now, so we can talk about the transition and, you know, the stuff that we're doing right now as well. Yeah.
Can I actually ask, like, I mean, just a completely not related question, but what is the difference between living in Shanghai and Japan? Like, how did it shift culturally?
Shanghai has changed so much from when I first moved there, Joe, back in 2008 to today. We moved. We ended up moving in 2019. We didn't know we were moving at the time because of COVID, but I would say there's similarities. I mean, like Tokyo and Shanghai are both big metropolises. There's huge millions and millions, tens of millions of people. There's like the very efficient metros. But I think differences, Shanghai is still kind of the Wild West in some ways. And Shanghai is changing so fast. Like literally a new subway line will pop up every 6 months. A brand spanking new shopping center will pop up like every couple of months. But post-COVID, things are changing a lot. And just to let you know, we moved out of Shanghai in 2019. So things aren't quite moving as breakneck speed in China. From what I hear, the economy isn't growing as fast. And Japan is more like a mature economy. It's not a developing economy. So things like the vibe is different here. Yeah. And the food scene is very different. If you're into that, I'm happy to share more about that as well. I'm a fan of both Chinese and Japanese food, but Yeah.
Well, I think between them, you've got the best food. Like for me anyway, Chinese and Japanese is the two best. So Gary, do you mind if I ask, were you born in Shanghai around there, or on Japan, or whereabouts?
No. Okay. My background's a little bit complicated. So basically, I was born in the U.S.
Okay.
I'm Chinese American. So my parents are originally from mainland China. They immigrated very early on. I was born and raised in LA, as you can see from my Dodgers hat. And went to university in LA, USC, University of Southern California. And I moved out to Asia in 2008. So so been in Asia from '08 till now. So that's about, that's a long time. So yeah.
Wow. And so like, how did you like do the transition sort of from, I guess, like, how did you start everything to do with like your summit and like basically working with Amazon sellers? How did that kind of come along?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So my background basically is the intersection of e-commerce and supply chain. So before I moved to Shanghai, the first product I ever sold online was in 2005 on eBay. This was back when eBay was the biggest e-commerce marketplace. This is before the whole Amazon FBA rocket ship took off. Okay, so I first got started 2005. I was packing I was selling women's shoes. My first private label brand were women's shoes. Profit was really good, but sizing was a nightmare and a lot of customer service returns. It was a big headache, and there was no FBA at the time. So literally, I was picking and packing. I was driving my little car, to the post office in LA downtown. So I had like a little, 6-figure business that I built back in '05. That was my first foray into e-commerce. 2008, I wanted to make a move because Shanghai at the time, it was like the hotspot in Asia. It was super cosmopolitan. The economy was just growing. Beijing had the Olympics in 2008. So I kept hearing about NPR, like they were talking about Beijing Olympics. And I had actually studied abroad when I was in college in China, in Shanghai, and in Beijing. And I really became obsessed with the whole fast-paced lifestyle. And nothing against LA, but LA, again, it's kind of like a developed place, right? But Shanghai, it was just like you're meeting new people from all over the world. It's a super exciting place. So I decided to pick up and make a move in '08 without a job in hand. I don't want to give you my life story, but basically made a move to Shanghai in 2008. I stumbled upon a job through my university alumni network in sourcing, working for a small consulting firm. And then basically they helped Brazilian clients source from Chinese factories. So I became over time the point person visiting the Chinese factories, negotiating, calling BS when, they're pretending to be a factory. They're actually a middleman, source, like many, many different types of products, from auto parts to solar water heaters to exercise bikes, you name it. So that's how I kind of, on the ground got my real world experience into the sourcing world. And, over time, I got involved with the Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. I think that's one of the oldest chambers of commerce in Asia, over 100 years history. And, really tried to grow within that. But I kind of hit a ceiling in that job, and around, how do I get to e-commerce again and the summit? So let me to address your question. About 2015, I started hearing about Amazon FBA. I was listening to podcasts, when I was in Shanghai, like late nights in the evenings, like the amazing seller Scott Volker, like Steve Chu. My wife quit her job, and I'm like, I know that stuff. I was doing eBay before. I had stopped when I made a move to China because they didn't have FBA, right? But I'm like, I'm on the ground. I can just go to the factory direct. I put two and two together. So I got back into e-commerce about 2015. I had a former business partner at the time. One of the first private label Amazon product I did were Apple Watch bands. So we created our own Apple Watch bands when the watch first launched about 2015, 2016. So at that time, we just hypothesized. There was no Jungle Scout, there was no Helium-10 yet, none of all the research tools. So we just hypothesized, like, hey, it's kind of like, the iPhone cases, like that economy, right? Like iPhone launched, and there was like, billions of dollars to be made in accessories. We're like, okay, watch is going to be big. We hypothesized that, and then like, let's get into the straps, right? Because Apple at the time only had like 6 straps. Everything was like either like silicone or like the really expensive Hermes leather, right? So we had like these really cool NATO straps, nylon, kind of like James Bond. Like there was a new James Bond film, so we're getting onto that, riding that that wave. So long story short, we created a 6-figure brand out of that in year 1, and then unfortunately my business partner and I, we kind of went our separate ways. So we stopped doing that, and then I created several other of my own private label brands. I sold moderately well, like 6-figure seller ish. This was 2016 to 2018. And how did I get into summits? Okay, so I got married in 2015. My wife is from Shanghai, and it was 2018, and we were expecting our child. Okay, so prior to that, I would always fly to these conferences, like in Hong Kong at the time, Global Sources Summit. But my wife was expecting. I was grounded. I couldn't go anymore. So I thought, rather than being left behind, why not invite these 7-figure sellers to teach me online and to teach everyone else online what they're doing? So that was the genesis of 7-figure seller summit. So it was born in 2018, really designed to help e-commerce sellers, Amazon sellers grow, scale, and exit their businesses. So fast forward to today, we've run 8 7-figure seller summits online. And then we had one offline conference last year in Japan, all about selling on Amazon Japan. And this year in April, we're going to have our second in-person event, also in Japan as well. And we're going to have the online summit again in June. So that will be Summit 9. So that's sorry for giving you guys my life story, but yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, and there's just a huge amount to unpack there. So maybe we'll try go bit by bit and kind of pull this thread. So I guess starting from kind of the beginning of that, you mentioned that you're really a sourcing expert, and kind of that's how you kind of why you went to Shanghai and how then you kind of got back into e-commerce. So just starting with the sourcing stuff, any like key insights or that you have for kind of Western-based sellers sourcing in China?
Well, a lot has changed since 2008. Back then, Alibaba wasn't as well known as it is today. Mm-hmm. I feel like sourcing from China has really matured, because in the early days, suppliers really were not familiar with the whole Amazon FBA ecosystem, right? But now, like, suppliers, it's they know FNSKUs, they know all of the requirements. Like, they probably know it better than some of the newbie sellers, right?
Yeah.
So a lot has changed. I feel that sourcing from China, I mean, it is a relationship business, because the way you do business in China, there's this concept in Chinese called Guanxi. I don't know if you've heard of this. Guanxi. Have you guys heard about that? Okay. So Guanxi, so quick, like Chinese, like business cultural lesson, doing business in China 101. Guanxi literally translates into relationships. So in China, the concept of Guanxi it's like a mixture of time, of trust, of credibility and your background, and even you making an effort to boots on the ground, land in China, visit the factory, sit down with the owner, have lunch, do shots of baijiu, maybe go to karaoke afterwards, shoot this what, and learn more about the person behind the business, right? For doing business successfully in China, and I've done this over the years with my own business. I've represented my foreign clients doing this. It's really essential to successfully do business in China. I mean, this will separate a seller that gets better attention to their orders, more attention to detail, and if anything goes wrong, they're more likely to work with you than being like, whatever, this guy's not worth it. So I think number one, being able to visit China, look them in the eye, really sit down, put your product on the table, look at it from all angles, really look at ways to work together to get the cost down, to bring the quality up, work on, other ways like, new product creation. I think that's really key, like concept of Guanxi and being able to physically go to China. I think that's probably the biggest thing, because obviously you can do a lot over Zoom, over emails, WeChat, etc. But like actually going to China, that will really separate you as a seller that really gets, like a strong relationship building versus just like, all the other people on Alibaba are contacting you.
I mean, this is actually really interesting because like obviously since the last maybe 4 or 5 years, there has been so much more advice also for sellers. Like one of the, I guess, the best well-known courses out there is the Helium 10 Freedom Ticket, and part of that is like they very much focus on the fact that you have to build these relationships, that the best way to do this is going to the conferences and then actually meeting the factories on ground. I guess my question is like, do you see that part of this, because there has been so many more smaller sellers coming out and following this advice, do you see that there has been I guess maybe some devaluation because there is so much more, I guess, supply of sellers that like go and perhaps do exactly what the courses say, and maybe it's not so unique anymore?
I think COVID really put a monkey wrench into that trend, because prior to COVID, yes, you're right. China was pretty, you're seeing more and more foreigners visit China, but post-COVID, there's actually a lot of, like with the whole political, stuff going on, and there's actually some people fear going to China. They're worried that they're going to get detained. I don't know if you've heard about that. I mean,
I've heard
yeah, there's probably a very minuscule chance. I mean, unless you go to China and you're publicly protesting on the street and you're criticizing like their leaders, or you're like, citing like the Tiananmen incidents, etc. But some people, like even in the Amazon space, I'm not going to name any names, but some people are really like, it's almost like fear mongering. Like they're scared to go to China. And so I don't see as many people going to China as before, because a lot of people, maybe they went to China pre-COVID, but post-COVID, they see, I don't, even like the number of flights in between, like going in and out of China, they haven't resumed to pre-COVID levels. So I don't think that many people are going to China anymore post-COVID. So
Yeah,
I think if you do go to China, that still will separate you from most, most of the, the buyers. Yeah, I think they're, there's still value if you can go.
I mean, that's really fascinating, Gary. And kind of my follow-up question to this, which we kind of mentioned at the top of the podcast, you then, with the former chair of the American Chamber of Commerce, you went to the White House.
I was the supply chain committee chair. So there were like a dozen committees. Yeah, I wasn't the chair of the whole chamber, but only within the supply chain. So what we did is we had regular monthly meetings where we would discuss hot topics related to sourcing, logistics, supply chain, and at that time 2018 with the beginnings of the trade war with Trump at the helm. So yeah.
So I mean, assuming for a second that Trump does become president, what's your which obviously is not a given, but what's your kind of outlook into the future? You've been in his White House. Do you think that people are going to have to move away from China? How do you see that developing in that world where Trump kind of goes back into the White House again?
Yeah, I'm not a political what do you call it, like a commentator, but I guess in my totally layman's assessment, I heard that he wants 60% tariffs on China. If that's the case, that wouldn't be good for sellers and it wouldn't be good for the American consumers, because I mean, you can try to replace some things from China, but China, I mean, it's just the manufacturing, like how broad it is and how deep it is. There's no one country that can substitute it, right? I mean, there could be some products that can be replaced, in India, Vietnam, Thailand, it's Mexico, etc. But if he does win, then I think that could be a setback in terms of sourcing from China. But yeah, we are seeing, capacity. Like India is, I believe, the fastest growing manufacturer in terms of like imports and like growth, since COVID. So India is a benefactor. And then at the same time, if we were to kind of peel back the onion a little bit, some savvy Chinese manufacturers, they're either setting up, their own factories in Vietnam, like their own factories in other countries, like even in Mexico, and then, kind of circumventing the whole tariff system, right? I mean, and there's also like transshipping where like the Chinese factory, the order, it would, stop over in some other country, like maybe Canada, and then come in from that, the third destination into the US and circumventing these tariffs. So, I mean, there's always going to be some ways around this. I mean, my recommendation, I know some people are doing stuff like under declaring or like declaring under a false customs category. I would really advise against that because you're breaking the law and you could be jeopardizing, your business and your own, your own self, right? You could go to jail, you could get fined for stuff like that, right? We're not just like, playing video games. We're talking about like real life stuff. So I would not advise, people do that. Just public service announcement.
Fair enough. And actually, I wanted to. This was one of the questions that I really had on my mind because, from what I've seen from the Amazon community, there is a lot of conversation about, all right, what are the alternatives to China? Because I agree, there is definitely conversations about the fact that it's maybe not such a good idea to put all of your eggs in one basket and just source from China. I guess my question is it wise for sellers to diversify their sort of sourcing matrix? And then what would you say is the second best market to kind of, I guess, add to your roster of sourcing, of sourcing countries?
Yeah. Obviously, it does make sense to diversify your supply chain just to mitigate your risks, because we saw what happened during COVID, right? And if we learn from the big players like the Apples, like the Walmarts, they've been diversifying their supply chain, for like a decade, right? They've had this conversation, sourcing from India and Vietnam, like, for years, even before COVID, right? So it does make sense to diversify. However, obviously most sellers don't have the whole supply chain team working for them, right? So it's a matter of whether you can handle the bandwidth of coordinating shipments from, multiple countries. It really depends on what you're manufacturing. If you're doing like high-tech stuff like electronics, I think it'll be difficult to replace that from China. But if you're doing more manual labor intensive type products like, eco-friendly, like home decor, maybe like, certain types of bags, then I think it does make sense for you to consider countries like India, like Vietnam, especially because they have, like India has the labor force. I mean, as a whole, as a general rule of thumb, we can tell just, China, they're really trying to move up the value ladder, right? They're the world's leading buyer of like robot technology, automation, right? So they're trying to move up to like more premium type stuff. So China is willing to let some of the lower value ladder items, like the more manual labor intensive, like, maybe some clothing, just like cut and sew type products, they're willing to let that go to like India and Vietnam. And we're already seeing that. So that way you can take advantage of the lower labor costs in India and in Vietnam. Okay. So is it as easy to source from India and Vietnam as China? I would say no, just because China has had a head start in the whole, foreign trade, international trade. So like the logistics are smoother, the ports are more, they tend to run better. There's like, things tend to flow more smoothly, and it's easier to find suppliers in China via Alibaba and trade shows. But if you're willing to do a little legwork. And there's excellent like resources out there. Like there's the India sourcing trip, there's a Vietnam sourcing trip. They're run by Megla Bardwaj. So that's a great way. I've attended India sourcing trip in Delhi, and then they had the Delhi fair at the same time. So the cool part about that, it's kind of like a mini Canton Fair. So everyone knows Canton Fair is the biggest granddaddy trade show in China, right? So India, there's the Delhi fair. It's not quite as big, but all of those suppliers, they're export ready, right? So that's another good way to get kind of fast track your sourcing from those countries.
Yeah, I've heard such great things about Megla. Yeah, she she always comes really highly recommended in any sort of conversation about Indian sourcing. So I guess Amazon sellers should definitely take a note.
Yeah, I would definitely check it out. I believe the sourcing trip happens twice a year, if I'm not mistaken. And she began a Vietnam sourcing trip as well. She has some partners in Vietnam. So if you guys want to consider that, definitely check that out.
Definitely. So Gary, I'd like to switch lanes a bit, kind of move towards, I guess, one of the next phases of what you've been working on. And this is obviously, as you say, you're now in Japan, you're helping people to optimize for Japan. Your anecdote on the Chinese culture was new to me, but I have come across, Japanese at least in a professional sense. So when I was out in Singapore, setting up Amazon Singapore, we had the Japanese team over, and they came to kind of help guide us and kind of give us some tips for like the Amazon launch of Singapore. And I remember they the culture was like incredibly different. They kind of had like a first like half an hour meeting in the morning, and the Japanese kind of leader came in, and it was him and all his kind of his team members on one side, and he went through and he was like, I'm this, and this is this person, they're in charge of this, and he'd go into like huge amounts of details about what each like team member was and what they were doing in the meeting, what everything like that. And then we went to the other side, and my poor manager at the time was completely unprepared for this kind of thing. So she was like looking around at the team. She didn't even know what half of us were working on at the time. So it was kind of like a real mismatch. So I know the Japanese culture is very, very different. But yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on how it's also massive, right? It's got twice the population of the UK. So it's an enormous population, super advanced, I think. So yeah, how can people optimize best for Japan?
In terms of Amazon sellers, I feel that not many people pay attention to Amazon Japan, the marketplace. And it's kind of surprising because if you look at the size of the marketplace, Amazon Japan is ranked number 4. So it's, US first, then Germany, and UK and Japan. They're kind of very similar, 3, 4. I mean, the currency has devaluated, the yen in Japan. So it's number 4. In terms of the numbers, there's 126 million people that live in Japan. It's double the UK population, as you said, Max. And Amazon is everywhere in Japan. If people watching haven't been to Japan recently, literally Amazon Prime, they have same day shipping here in Tokyo. I just ordered like some kitchen food and like rice and stuff. I ordered in the morning, I got it tonight, right? And Amazon's the most popular shopping platform in Japan now. They overtook the local incumbent Rakuten during the pandemic. And e-commerce has about a 73% penetration rate in Japan. So it's like completely normalized for people to shop online. I think, at the same time, the competition level in Japan is significantly lower and it's weaker than Amazon US, Amazon UK, and even Amazon Germany. In terms of like the number of reviews, in terms of like even the quality of the listings. We see like a lot of very obviously foreign sellers, like a lot of Chinese sellers, they're not really localizing the listings. So in terms of optimization of your listings, I mean, there's tools out there to do it. I know eComtent can help with, the image side. So I definitely, depending on how much resources the people watching have, the best thing to do is to obviously hire a local native speaker to help you translate your listings, not just for language, but also for, you know, the culture, because there's different levels of, you know, formality and, you know, like respect. And, you know, like in Japan, people don't really say like, hey, I'm like, you know, we're a small like mom and pop business, and, you know, we're like doing our best. We really appreciate your feedback. You know, people don't say that at all. I mean, it would be very awkward in Japan. It's like in Japan, like the customer is really elevated in terms of respect, and everything is like catered to them. Yeah, there's differences, but I think, you know, the biggest advantage selling to Japan, if you're already selling in the US, is the fact that Amazon's global review system, I'm sure, Max, you're very familiar with this. You can actually carry over your existing reviews on your SKUs, let's say from the US into Japan. So if you're already like, let's say you have 500 reviews, 700 reviews in the US, you can actually carry them over into Amazon Japan. So when you launch day one, you already have 500, 700 reviews. So that's the social proof that really helps you, you know, put gas, you know, in your rocket when you really launch from day one in Japan. And
I just
Japan.
A quick follow-up question. So I'm curious, like, how do you advise people to differentiate images? So you meant, you know, obviously you can with AI tools like eContent or anyone else, you can generate tons of images. What is different between you know, the American market, Japanese image visually?
This is a really good question, Max. We, you know, at the conference last year, the 7-Figure Seller Japan Master, we actually had like side-by-side image comparisons, and not just like Amazon products, but even movie posters. You would be surprised how different they are. The same movie in the US versus Japan, because in Japan, people are super detail oriented, like literally, like, you know, they want, like, if you have like, you know, wet naps, for example, they want the thickness of the wet nap. They want to know, okay, you can use it for your hands, you can use it for your tabletops, you can use it for your phones. It's like super detail oriented. In Japanese, there's like this term, like, I don't know if you're into sushi. Have you heard of like a chirashi bowl? Like, have you guys had that? Like chirashi? It's literally, it's like a bowl of rice with a whole bunch of different sashimi. Like there's some salmon, there's some tuna, there's some, you know, shrimp. You know, it's kind of messy, but there's like a lot of stuff going on, and, you know, there's a lot of, you know, really delicious things there. Similarly, a Japanese product, like on the page, there's so much like text, details, you know, measurements. Point one is this, point two is this, point three is this. Whereas in the US, you know, oftentimes you kind of have like a clean, minimalist aesthetic. In Japan, it's like all the way on the other end of the spectrum. I wish I could show you more. I like if I had some slides, but I mean, I hope that, you know, verbal description paints a picture of the difference. It's not to say that, you know, you can't do it, right? But, you know, that's how Japanese consumers look at product listings differently, like, let's say, compared to the US.
Okay, oof. I actually have like a bunch of questions, but my first question actually is, if you are a seller and you want to sell on Amazon Japan, would you then say that you kind of have to like almost have a completely brand new strategy, assets and everything specifically tailored to Japan? Because a lot of Amazon sellers obviously like to launch in new markets by sort of recycling what they have in probably Amazon.com, and then just kind of maybe tweak it a little bit and then let it into sort of new markets. So I guess my question is, do you think that if you are an Amazon seller and you want to do it properly in Japan, you kind of have to set almost like a new pot of budget in order to do this properly?
We actually we had a live webinar, like I think it was yesterday, with a 7-figure seller that sold in Amazon Germany, Amazon UK, and Amazon Japan. And he did a comparison of all of the costs involved, like all of the regulations and compliance involved, a comparison of like the different levels of, you know, VAT rates, shipping, supply chain times. And actually, Japan was simpler to get started than selling in, let's say, a UK or Germany, for a number of reasons. I don't think we have time to get into all of the details, but basically in Japan, there isn't like ongoing regulations like it is in UK and EU, right? Like there's like EPR, there's like the recycling, there's like the environmental. Like Amazon, if you register to sell, like say in Germany, Amazon will send you that email. It's kind of like a nightmare email. Like, okay, it's like your homework, guys. You got to do this by February 31st. You got to do that by June, and you got to hire a third-party service agency to do it. And those guys are slammed. They're backlogged, and it's not easy. Whereas in Japan, initially there's the import compliance that you have to go through, right? But that can be solved if you find a Japanese compliance specialist, and then they can walk you through the steps. Like certain products could be more scrutinized, like cosmetics, supplements, but basically the work is front loaded. So once you get that out of the way, you're done. You don't have like the ongoing regulations and stuff that you got to deal with, like EU. Okay. So that's one of the bridges to cross to sell into Japan, Joe. One of the other bridges, and kind of like what you're alluding to, before you go into the listing, you should do a product market fit analysis. What that means is you want to see how receptive your product will be in the Japanese market versus your home market, right? And there's ways that you can do that. There's tools out there, Helium 10, Jungle Scout, Data Dive, they all support Japan. Okay. Brand analytics and all of the tools in that back end. Amazon Japan, they support that as well. Okay, so I would do some homework on that, and also talking about AI. Right now we have AI, so if you're selling a kitchen product, you can actually ask ChatGPT, for example, do Japanese people, like for example, if you're selling a yoga mat, do Japanese people practice yoga? How big is the market? Right, I would use that as an initial test, right? I mean, I wouldn't trust it blindly because it will hallucinate, but that could be, the initial, impetus, and I would fact check that with Google. And then the other tool that is excellent to kind of do your product market fit analysis for Japan is a nifty little thing some of you guys may have heard of called YouTube. Okay, you can actually search on YouTube for a Japanese kitchen walkthrough. So you can see the size of the kitchen are Japanese people using this thing in Japan, right? This is an excellent way to, without physically flying into Japan or hiring an expensive consultant, you can see, right? If it's in the kitchen, if there's examples of people using it in Japan, that's a pretty good initial test, right? To find out your product market fit. So, I gave you like at least 2 ways you can kind of, get that initial product market fit, or 3 ways, also using the tools, right? To get that, kind of to de-risk it before you go into like rehauling all of your listings. For the images, definitely I would make modifications, but we're playing to win, right? I mean, we don't want to do like a half-assed listing, right? I mean, so definitely, I would localize the listings, whether you use tools like eComtent or you hire a professional. I would definitely, put my best foot forward if I want to, be successful in Japan, because entering a new marketplace, like I was talking to like a number of 8-figure sellers, for example, they have good success in the US. If they launch another product in the US, maybe it's like a $10,000 launch, it's not going to move the needle. But if they're able to move their catalog into a new market that is not as competitive, but has like a lot of volume, that could really add like, let's say 6 figures to their bottom line, or even like 7 figures, right? So that's what, the type of sellers we're seeing that, they're succeeding into selling in Japan.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would, on the ChatGPT stuff, I would shout out Perplexity to people listening. So it's like ChatGPT, but it gives you, it's basically going to overtake Google. They've had investment from Jeff Bezos and a bunch of other people, and they give you references on your search, and it is 50 times better than any other search engine, and I use it now daily. Probably, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say I'm now using it more than Google. I will say if that would probably give you a lot more honest answer or truthful answer rather than a hallucination. But that's fascinating, and I mean, you kind of touched on the next theme that we kind of want to, I know we've only got 15 minutes of your time left, but the next theme we wanted to go into, which was, your AI tips. And you kind of touched upon it a little bit there, but I mean, so maybe we can start by asking you. I remember we did this. You did this 28-day challenge, and you helped.
Yes.
You helped some sellers with like 28 kind of actionable things they could do. Do you want to talk about any of your favorites maybe from that to start with?
Yeah, we had a 28-day AI for e-commerce challenge, and I feel like, I mean, with AI, basically, I think the number one misconception with AI is trying to like find the perfect prompt. I see like a lot of people, they're like, selling like the 100 best prompts for like Amazon sellers, etc. In my experience, I don't know about for Joe and Max, but in my experience working with AI, I mean with ChatGPT, it's kind of like, I call it like a seesaw. You have to prompt the information, and then you ask ChatGPT for something. It gives you a reply, but we're not done yet, right? I'm like, okay, that's good, but have you thought about this, right? If it's, I'm looking for a kitchen product. You mentioned like Japanese people use it. Well, what type of Japanese people use it? Are they moms? Are they, elderly? So literally you have to go back and forth. It's not just like a one shot and you're done type deal. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, because some people, they just try it a couple of times. They're like, this thing, it really isn't all that. And then they give up. I think that's one of the biggest ones. I think also using ChatGPT kind of like as a partner, like even for something like negotiations, right? Like in our challenge, we actually created like a Chinese supplier negotiations partner, using ChatGPT. So literally you can practice negotiating with a Chinese supplier for a better price, for better payment terms, right? And then you can kind of like, low stakes scenario, right? Because a lot of people, they have like anxiety about this, but I think, using it like that, it can really help you in ways that you don't really expect. Obviously, there's also ways that you can use it for, for product development, listing optimization, and even with selling it to Japan. We're seeing use cases where we use AI for translations. I don't know if you guys have tested translations, but in my experience, the translations, at least with ChatGPT, are far better than Google Translate. Like literally, I mean, significantly better. And you can even use ChatGPT to do competitive analysis on your competitors' listings, to extract keywords in foreign languages. So there's a lot of use cases for it that that would help sellers.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I'll let Joe jump in a second, but I'm very cautious when talking to people about ChatGPT, because I think it is so raw. Like it's so raw and it hallucinates so much. But on the language point, like it's literally a large language model. That's exactly what it is. And what these things were originally designed to do in the Google research way back when they're creating them, was translation. So like translation is like spot on. I would trust it 99 times out of 100 for that specific task. That's what they were built for, and that's what they're great at. Joe, thoughts?
Actually, I have tested it for German, and I can tell you that it's not so hot on German, especially if you have to. Yeah, I think maybe like ChatGPT is struggling with a bit with the German. I think if it's a simpler text, it's fine. But I would say for anything that is more sophisticated, you still very much see the difference in German.
When they were training these things, they would not train it on a language, and they would give it that new language, and the AI, because they are large language models, would be able to talk in the new. They would work out a new language without any training, just from feeding it some stuff. So, I mean, I don't speak another language, so I bow to your guys, both of yours, expertise in this. But in terms of like using it, the technology for what it's designed to do, that's what they were trying to build, Google, when they were doing this. And Google Translate is rubbish. I can tell you from someone who used it in my Spanish and French GCSE, I never got good marks with using the Google Translate. So that's definitely not.
Yeah, it's a joke. It's a joke. Yeah. The camera, like the Google Camera Translate, that's kind of cool, because sometimes you're like traveling, and that's very useful. But yeah, as a whole,
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Gary, I actually had a question which is not so much about, let's say, AI in the sort of the practical context of sellers, but I'm curious from all of your experience with working with Chinese suppliers, where do you think, where do you think Chinese suppliers are currently with the use of AI and the integration of AI in, let's say, something like product development or any of the processes, including with sourcing?
I visited China last summer. This was August, so that's about 9 months ago. And obviously, things are changing very quickly. At that time, I saw very few Chinese suppliers using it, and talking with my sourcing agent partners, I was really like introducing it to them at that time. I mean, things may have changed by now. I know that there's the native Chinese AI tools out there. I have not tested them myself.
They don't have ChatGPT, do they? Can you? It's banned.
No, there's the firewall in China, right? Everyone knows like the censored website, so you can't access Google, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, even like Netflix. So you got to have a VPN, and VPNs are illegal in China, but people use them anyways. But yeah, it's so to answer your question, I did not see it. I mean, maybe in Shenzhen, I didn't visit Shenzhen this time. Shenzhen's kind of like the Silicon Valley of China. Maybe it's more prevalent, but I didn't see it. I haven't seen it yet.
I can imagine, and this is my hypothesis, so just tell me if I'm right, Gary. Like they can't have had this cultural explosion of ChatGPT and I remember talking to customers pre-ChatGPT free content, and they would not understand. They wouldn't understand what we're doing. They wouldn't understand prompting. They wouldn't it was completely alien. And then obviously everyone's using ChatGPT now. Is that right? Like, have they not had that kind of that cultural kind of leap because they just don't have the tool?
They have the local tools.
Okay.
Chinese people, their mindset is they're leapfrogging like a lot, like going from cash to digital currency, because there really wasn't like the whole checking system in China. It didn't exist. So literally people leapfrog that. And even going from like no internet connection to having a smartphone. Like most people in China never had like a PC or a laptop. So they leapfrog that. So mentally, Chinese people are very open to new technology and acceptance. I mean, just look at how fast China progressed from like 1980, where everybody was dressed in like a Mao suit on a bicycle, to today. And it's like Shanghai is like the postmodern city in the world, right? So Chinese people, I wouldn't be surprised if they suddenly leaped, I mean, to adopt this, yes. But in terms of the actual AI, there's restrictions that the government doesn't want certain content to be available in China. I mean, everybody knows this, right? So can you develop an AI that is both abiding by the party principles and still be valuable? I don't know. I mean, that's beyond my pay grade. So yeah.
Nice. Well, Max, I think actually it's time for your quickfire, no?
Time for the quickfire. Yeah, Gary, anything to add on any of those topics, or should we go into the quickfire?
No, let's go into the quickfire.
Sure. So yeah, if you could do short answers to all of these, we'll just rattle through them.
Sure.
So your favorite AI tool?
I have to go to the granddaddy, ChatGPT.
The granddaddy. I've never heard it being described like that before. But I like it. Favorite custom GPT?
I like the YouTube, the summarizer. That saves a lot of time. Yeah.
Cool. I didn't actually know we had one of those, but I'm going to use that now to summarize this podcast before I do the notes.
Yeah,
so that's good to know. Your estimate on when we reach AGI, artificial general intelligence?
Maybe it already exists somewhere in the lab somewhere. I don't know. This thing is like nobody can predict it. I don't know.
Fair enough. And AI net benefit or not for humanity?
I think for sure. I mean, it's a tool. I mean, it's like the internet, right? And people can get so much more done than before, right? So I think for sure. I mean, we have to adopt it just like any other technology, right? I mean, obviously there's downsides, right, with the deep fakes and all that stuff. But I think as a net, I mean, in my opinion, I think it is beneficial.
Great. Well, Gary, I mean, it's been an incredible episode. I've definitely learned a lot. How can people find you, follow you? Go to your. You mentioned various summits you're doing. How do people get a hold of that stuff?
Yeah. Well, the big thing I'm doing right now is helping existing like Amazon sellers selling to Japan. So if you are interested in learning more, we have an in-person 3-day conference in Japan, in Okinawa, April 8th, 9th, and 10th. And really it's for sellers already selling the US, already selling EU to enter Japan. They can learn more at 7figuresellerjapanmastermind.com.
Amazing.
And yeah, if anyone has any questions for me, feel free to drop me an email. It's Gary@8020sourcing.com. So yeah,
Great.
that's.
I'll put those links in the notes for people who will have them. And I've been to Okinawa actually, and for anyone UK based, I would describe it as Manchester of Japan. So I don't know if you've been to Manchester, Gary, but that is what I felt when I went there. Might not make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but that was my impression. But Gary, thank you. It's been an incredible episode.
Well, people also say it's the Hawaii of Japan. So there's also
well,
yeah.
There we go. That's two very, very different places. So
depending on where you go, right? Yeah, we have a resort hotel booked on a little island, so it's
nice.
but yeah.
Okay. Well, Manchester, Hawaii. Let us know. Let us know which camp you're in. But cool.
Right.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you so much, Max. Thank you so much, Joe. It's been a pleasure.
Same.
Wow, Joe, what do you think of that?
I learned loads. And I think it's so interesting because Gary has such an interesting perspective, both from his time in China, his time in America, and now in Japan. It's like a really interesting kind of juxtapositions of cultures, but then also from a business perspective, how different each approach is. I think he will be actually a brilliant person to guide you to launch something in say in Japan, because he understands all of the different markets. So yeah, I learned a lot.
I genuinely learned a lot, which is great. I felt like we had a private kind of, well, it's not private because hopefully lots of people listen, but we had a real kind of in-depth discussion there. Like my mind was spinning because I was like, God, why don't we train a model to optimize for Japan culture and train Japanese style infographics so the people, So I'm going to take that away in my team and say hey, this should be on our roadmap because I'm sure that could add a lot of value to a lot of people. So yeah, I've definitely taken away at least that from the discussion. But Joe, who we got? We've got a
version 3.
Exactly, version 3. But I mean, it's just such an incredible use for AI, and if we do it right and we work with Gary or someone who knows what they're doing there, we could easily do that. But yeah, who we got? We've got a real all-star guest list now coming in to the pod. So do you want to drop a few names who we got coming in the next few weeks?
I do. So not next week, but the week after, we have the one and only Mr. Kevin King. I am so excited to chat to him. And actually, it's finally my turn to grill him. He grilled me in his podcast, so now is payback time. But no, I think it's going to be such a unique perspective on everything that is happening with, obviously, Cosmo and Rufus, and just generally what he thinks is coming up for sellers. So I think it will be definitely an episode that people shouldn't miss.
So we have Kevin King, and then the week after that, we have Amy Weiss, who, again, a bit like Gary, has been incredibly supportive of of myself, and also kind of quick on this AI train. Like one of the first people to be looking at it, interested in it, testing it out. And that's going to be a great episode. And I think we have some more exciting names after that. So we have Ricky Kamar, he was with Amazon with me way back when, and now he is director of the TikTok e-commerce in the UK. So that's going to be a great one. We have Rita Java. We have Bradley
Java. I mean, Rita Java is like, I love Rita because she always has something under her hat, something that nobody knows in the Amazon seller community. I mean, last year she won the $1 billion Seller Summit exactly by talking about AI for Amazon sellers. This year she won the Best Hack Contest again in the $1 billion Seller Summit. Showing an amazing tool that does so many things. I am so excited about her because she really knows so much about AI, but then also in the context of Amazon sellers. So I think it will be good.
Yeah, and sprinkled into these kind of the big names in the e-commerce industry, we have a few people who we both think are just going to be excellent insights. So we have, one of my fellow co-founders, Texas co-founder, who is basically building the next AI for managing your social media. And this guy, he knows his stuff. And, I have full faith that this is going to be one of these kind of like big names in the industry in the next few years. So well worth listening to. And I believe we have like Microsoft and Meta people coming on as well. Joan.
Don't spill all the beans. We have to keep some surprise.
The conclusion of this is people should subscribe. They should follow. They should do what they should share with their friends, because we have a lot coming down the track, and an exciting new format, which we'll reveal at some point as well. So, Joe, pleasure to talk to you as always.
Same, Max. And thank you so much for all of our listenings that are tuning in. It's honestly, I think I will speak for both of us when I say that for us, it's like a joy to do this podcast. And it's a double joy when we know that actually somebody's listening to it. So thank you very much to the listeners.
Well, and for episodes like today, I just learned an incredible amount. I mean, and I've got a lot of ideas forming around. But yeah, thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye.